Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, commentary, and analysis about the Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. This week, my guest is Rodney Wren. He is a teacher of government and economics and also a debate and forensics coach. While in college, he won 9 debate and forensics national championships. He has practical experience in politics, being the immediate past chairman of the Harvey County Republican Party, and he was also a speechwriter for Mike Pompeo during his first campaign in 2010. He appears regularly, as I do, as a panelist on This Week in Kansas, which is broadcast on some other television station. Let's watch my conversation with Rodney Wren. Well, Rodney Wren, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. So, you are an accomplished debater and you teach debate and forensics to young people in high school. Let me ask you, the debates we have today in our political campaigns, I'm thinking of Sam Brownback and Paul Davis, for example, running for governor a few months ago. Are these really debates?
No.
Not at all.
They're not. I was just going back and watching some episodes of The West Wing a few weeks ago, and when Jimmy Smits's character is running for president as a little-known congressman from Texas, he's trying to balance the professional political knowledge of Josh Lyman, the character, and with this kind of idealism that he has about really trying to have a good conversation with voters. And Lyman keeps coming back to this, look, it's not about that. And Smits goes on to this rant, Jimmy Smits goes on this rant about how, these debates shouldn't be just 60 or 90 second sound bites that are...
Sometimes even 30 seconds.
Even 30, absolutely, that are focus group tested to make sure that they are on a particular message. And if you watch, as I'm sure you did, multiple debates between Governor Brownback and Paul Davis, you saw both men repeat a lot of the same phrases over and over and over again. But that's how they're coached. That's how these professional political pundits that they bring in, these campaign professionals, that's what they tell them to do to not get off message.
So they've got phrases, words, messages that they've tested perhaps in focus groups or polls, and so they're coached to repeat those, even perhaps to the point of ignoring the question and just getting their talking points out.
Well, and if the question's too pointed or if they're not prepared for the question, I mean, you almost have to give them credit because I use the word really good candidates, but really practiced candidates will key in on trigger words that will go in a certain direction if the question is trying to take them in a direction they don't want to go. And for me, it's frustrating. I think for a lot of voters, it's frustrating. At the same time, whether it's high school competitive debate, college competitive debate, or the world of political debates, people do things that work. Mm-hmm. And sadly, the voting electorate in Kansas and probably nationwide don't really expect all that much from these debates. I mean, I would venture to say if you were to go to one of these debates, the people that are at the debates, probably most of them, like the general body politic, have made up their mind already.
Well, I think we saw that at the Kansas State Fair debate, where there was definitely two camps there. I mean, the people there with their T-shirts, their signs, everybody had their minds made up. Now, what gets me is oftentimes in these political debates or whatever they are, there are conflicting presentations of facts. One candidate says, for example, school spending is down. The other one says, no, I increased school spending. How are these conflicts of facts or realities handled in actual real debates, and what could we do about them in these political debates?
On day one of my class beginning of the year, my students get a little history lesson about Aristotle. Mm-hmm. And Aristotle opined that debate was about the search for the probable truth. So there's two key words there, the search and probable. The problem in these political debates is these candidates don't want people searching.
They want to get elected.
They want to get elected, right, and they want to be able to say what their brand is and try to articulate their message. The only way to really solve, to try to, get at, to figure out what the competing claims might be is, in the world of political debates, is you'd have to have a moderator that would try to dig in a little bit or ask follow-up questions. Now, but that's assuming that the rules that have been agreed upon by the campaigns would allow the moderator to ask those kind of probing follow-up questions.
And you'd have to have a moderator who is very well informed,
right,
and who is also able to stand up to what are some pretty powerful personalities oftentimes.
Absolutely. And even then, just because you're trying to ask a probative question of a professional political candidate doesn't mean that they're actually going to try to deviate from their message. And even then, because my brain's now going to Candy Crowley and her ridiculous submarine that was completely unfactual of Mitt Romney back in 2012 during that second debate between him and President Obama. You have to be careful. And so, in the world of competitive debate, those kind of arguments are made. If you make a claim that's counterfactual to my claim, or I think it's counterfactual, I'm going to point that out in my response. Okay, Bob,
and don't you have the right to demand evidence or something
absolutely
like that?
You do, absolutely.
And of course, that doesn't really work well on a 30-minute TV
show. No, it doesn't. And I was critical of this of Paul Davis in this last campaign. Not that they listened to me or that whatever, but for me, it's like, okay, Governor Brownback made these claims about school funding going up. Paul Davis could have said something very simply that took 5 seconds about how that was due to retirement spending and forced increases by the Kansas Supreme Court, not more money going to the classroom. I never. And I watched almost all the debates that I could watch because I'm that kind of guy. I never heard Paul Davis make any of that kind of analysis that would try to point out that Governor Brownback's claim might be problematic or might not be as factual as he'd like. It was just claim, counterclaim, and repeat. There was no effort to try to actually rebut one of the other's claims.
And sometimes people, they say, well, we can't get too far into the weeds. Like if Paul Davis, really what you said is not offering too much detail, but sometimes I think they're coached. If you go detail on people, that's getting out in the weeds. They're going to tune you out. Is that another problem?
They're definitely going to be coached to do that oftentimes. And this is what's sad. And from my little dalliances into the world of politics myself as a candidate, these professional types are giving out advice to not give too much information, because too much information, while trying to help voters make an educated decision, also can be used by the opposition in a mailer, in a TV spot, in a radio spot, to attack you for saying something you like. Is that good for any particular office, that we can't have those kind of actual conversations because we're afraid of how they might be used against us? In the world of politics, it may be a problem.
And right now we have a situation where, this is not said during a debate, but Governor Brownback, when he reduced tax rates, he said this is a shot of adrenaline, it's a grand experiment, and now those words are being used against him. So, it's just the type of hyperbole that politicians use, but then those words can come back I don't want to say twisted, but just simply repeated by your opponents sometimes.
Well, absolutely, but they certainly can be twisted as well. You look at whether it's vote or whether it's something they said. In my state house district that I live in, Representative Carolyn Bridges, who's a Democrat, voted against whatever that big school funding bill that had a bunch of other things bundled in it at the tail end of the session due to the Supreme Court decision on equity. The Kansas Republican Party sent out a mailer about how she voted against increasing education funding. And it is what it is. It is politics. I think the problem, and I'm not saying this is a new problem by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly there's a problem in that political discussions often go to more baser type of instincts. People are playing to the lowest common denominator. And again, it's because it works, and we don't have real true conversations. People always hold the Lincoln Douglas debates up as these kind of, sacred type of political discussions that really tried to mete out the differences between the candidates, and there may be some truth to that.
Rodney, hold that thought
Sure.
for a moment, because we're going to take a moment for a commercial break, and when we come back, I'll ask you another question about these debates. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Rodney Wren. So, Rodney, we've been talking about political debates and so forth, and coming up in just a couple months in Wichita, we're going to elect a new mayor because our present mayor is not able to run again because of term limits, and three other council seats are up. But I think the mayoral race is going to attract the most attention. We have what's called a jungle primary, where all the candidates, no matter what party they're in, will run together. Two will advance on to the general election. What can we do in these two elections, as far as forums, debates, whatever, to try to really learn what these candidates are all about?
Well, the first thing I think that needs to be done is that that local or municipal elections need to be put in November of odd year elections. Mm-hmm. I mean, you think about, we just had in Kansas a very contentious big election that went down the beginning of November. Mm-hmm. And so really
and
you've got...
And the primary before that.
Well,
too.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you've got, in November to April for people to, and I suppose they could file beforehand, but it's a very short window for people to even just get out and contact potential voters mm-hmm. and potential constituents. So I think if we
but
put
some
that...
people say, mercifully, these city campaigns are short.
And I suppose it could go either way. Mm-hmm. I personally am a fan of more information, more mm-hmm. discussion, more debate is better. Obviously, if it gets ad nauseum, then, that's a problem. But I think if it was moved to November odd years, it would really serve voters better to try to really understand more about these candidates. As far as the jungle primary is concerned, I don't think that benefits the voters at all. And I don't know what the solution to try to have government limit that is, whether it's increasing the filing fee, whether it is to require a petition and gathering a certain number of signatures mm-hmm. like you can do for the county commission to get on the ballot. But I'm not a fan of and I don't know why. I mean, I do know why. People oftentimes run for office as a resume builder. They're mm-hmm. angling for jobs. Not to cast too many aspersions on what their real desire might be, but you look at some of the candidates that have announced or indicated or hinted that they might run for mayor here in Wichita, and you're just scratching your head. Mm-hmm. Why? This doesn't make any sense. But I don't think that between January and April and what short amount of time that gets us, because we first have to go through the primary, and that's in March. So really you're talking probably 2 months of campaigning right. in cold weather, possibly bad conditions with snow, ice, what have you. It's just not real conducive to a thriving kind of atmosphere.
The retail type of politicking
right.
like we see in the summer
right.
or fall where candidates can go out in the evening and mm-hmm. they meet the voters door to door. Yeah. You can't do that much in February. It gets dark so early and it's cold and it's dark. And
right. Right. Well, and again, the more candidates you try to bring into a forum, there's just less time that they have for responses or less time they have to be able to answer a question.
And there is that idea that everybody who runs should be treated with some accord. Remember this year at the Kansas State Fair in the governor's debate, Keen Umber, the right. Libertarian Party candidate, was not invited. He is a substantial person. I mean, mm-hmm. I voted for him. Mm-hmm. And why WIBW Radio, I think it was, did not invite him to be in that debate, I think was really damaging to their reputation.
I think so too, but it also speaks volumes about the Republican and Democrat Party mm-hmm. In Kansas. Because the Brownback and Davis campaigns, because they agree to these debates mm-hmm. and they have to negotiate the rules. And I'd be willing to bet that the Davis and Brownback campaigns were not all that interested in having Keen Umber on stage with
because
them.
he really was a qualified person, knew a lot about government. He's an attorney and an accomplished person.
Absolutely.
And, wasn't really beholden to the parties as they are.
Right.
And that kind of brings up another thing, Rodney. There was a couple years ago, people oftentimes say we need a new party. And, we've got other parties besides Democratic and Republican. And it really astonished me that Keen Umber did not really get that many votes as Libertarian for governor this year. But there was an effort a couple years ago. Some people thought, let's have a party, and they called it the Moderate Party. You may have had some knowledge of how that worked. What happened there, and what does that tell us about our political system?
The first part of your question is that the individuals who were really spearheading that Kansas Moderate Party just weren't moderate. Mm-hmm. They were quite left wing.
Okay.
And they were, in my opinion, looking for a venue, an avenue to try to gain electoral success, perhaps maybe bring something. But, political parties generally, they espouse an ideology. Mm-hmm. A moderate party, what ideology can a moderate party really espouse? And I was involved with that, but severed ties, because to me a moderate party should have been about openness and not really what amounted to left-wing politics. But the Republican and Democrat parties nationwide have a lock. Politics is about power, mm-hmm. and they have zero interest in any kind of viable third party, mm-hmm. and they're going to do everything they can to try to delegitimize any one of those from really gaining a foothold.
And we've seen examples. I think Ron Paul at the presidential level, mm-hmm. pretty compelling candidate.
Sure.
But he was never able to gain much traction. Gary Johnson succeeded him as the Libertarian Party presidential nominee. So, yeah, very difficult. You can't even get on the ballot in some states, I think.
Right.
I think Kansas has pretty good ballot access laws, mm-hmm. but not so in all cases. So, Rodney, we're going to take another break for just a couple of moments. This is Bob Weeks on Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Rodney Wren. So, Rodney, you opposed the sales tax in Wichita. That was certainly, that election, one of the biggest political stories locally. Of course, there were bigger elections statewide. And I remember you spoke at the Wichita City Council meeting where the council decided to put the measure on the ballot. What were your reasons for opposing that sales tax, if I might ask?
Sure. The biggest reason in my mind was based on logic. And when you teach argumentation theory and persuasion, logic is a big part of that. The city council premised the ballot measure because they could have just said, well, we did the surveys, we did all this community engagement, here it is, and we're gonna do this. Mm-hmm. They put it to a ballot question, and they said it was based on these surveys, and surveys have their own problems.
102 meetings,
right,
and so forth.
All these kind of community engagement meetings, yes. And based on that, because they wanted that community feedback, based on that brought them to the point of the ballot question. And my point was, I'm not sure if, but really what amounted to about 3% of Wichitans being involved at best mm-hmm. in those surveys and as well as those meetings, if that was really a good sample. And again, if your premise is that you want as much information, you want as much community feedback as possible, then the way to get the most feedback would have been to separate those 4 questions mm-hmm. on the ballot. And then when people are going into the they're not called the booth anymore, you're going to get the best feedback. And I think, honestly, if that would have been done, my guess is 1 or 2 of those measures might have passed, but people just weren't comfortable with grouping all that together.
The bundling, yeah. I think the very small portion of the tax for transit would have probably passed very high. But as it was, the measure was really trounced. 62%. That's landslide territory, really, mm-hmm. Which says something, I think, about the city's engagement process. But there's been really hasn't been much fallout from that. I mean, we still got the Wichita Chamber, which I think was really the driving force behind the bundling.
Right.
They said, we will not support the sales tax if the jobs portion is not bundled in. Although I sense the chamber is getting a little more active. There was an op-ed by the president and incoming chair of the chamber a couple of weeks ago in the Wichita Eagle that talked about people who oppose the use of economic development incentives. I think I was a partial subject of that.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah, he says, we were branded as anti-business zealots.
Right.
These anti-business rants are branding Wichita with an anti-business climate. So is opposing corporate welfare creating an anti-business climate? Well, what's your opinion on that?
I don't think so, and I think it's also laughable that they're attacking name callers by name calling, and I don't see why. Well, let's go back to a theoretical premise. Of course, my guess is, if you might be of the opinion that if these incentives are good for Textron or good for Learjet or whomever, that they should be good for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so give them to everybody. Mm-hmm. How's that anti-business? That's very pro-business.
Right.
And I just think it's laughable that because people think that there should be some kind of separation between government and private entities, and you can call it, and it is really corporate welfare, that they're somehow anti-business. And you can also go back to Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman wasn't a fan of the word capitalism because capitalism intimates a political ideology like socialism or communism does. Milton Friedman talked about markets and free markets. Mm-hmm. And so as we often see in capitalist, quote-unquote, societies, there's an awful lot of crony capitalism. Mm-hmm. And it may not be as awful or problematic as something really corrupt, but it's certainly I guess I just don't like the whole concept of picking winners and losers. Why does Textron get all these benefits but somebody else doesn't? Mm-hmm. Why does Bombardier versus someone else? And you've pointed out in your newsletter and on this show, we've given lots of taxpayer money to Boeing. Mm-hmm. Where are we at with Boeing? And the
mayor was really mad when Boeing announced it. I mean, he stomped his foot figuratively, and they came up with an analysis: $658 million. Right. That's $750 million worth of forgiven taxes over several decades. Right. But that's taxes that other people have to pay. Generally, I've suggested sometimes that the city reduce spending by the cost of these incentives, and they just thought that was crazy.
Right. Well, and again, it just depends on your presupposition. Mm-hmm. And what I don't like is this concept of, well, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. That sounds like extortion to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I just there's something about that I don't like. And this may be sacrilegious to say, Wichita isn't Seattle, Washington. Wichita isn't South Carolina. Kansas is not Texas. Mm-hmm. There are draws to those states that Kansas just doesn't have. And basically to take your tax dollars, my tax dollars, everybody else's tax dollars, and to give them to somebody because they're going to create jobs, I just think is really, it's laughable, but it's the reverse Robin Hood, which doesn't make any sense. And if I can, he doesn't pay me, but Dr. Russ Sobel, who's an economics professor from
He's
Citadel,
been on this show.
Marvelous. If your viewers haven't gone to Wichita Pachyderm Club's Facebook page when he was here 2 summers ago, and you can watch his 30-minute video. It's outstanding. There's zero evidence. I don't care what Wichita State's putting out. It's not academic. There's zero academic evidence.
It's good for the company that receives incentives, but as far as the entire metropolitan area, which is what we got to be concerned with, not so good. Yeah, and that archived episode of Wichita Liberty TV is on YouTube or WichitaLiberty.org, my site as well. Mm-hmm. So Rodney, we're just out of time this week. So Rodney Wren, thanks very much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Wichita Liberty.